Alrighty, here it is, episode 3 of the KNC Basketball Podcast, starting right now. Thank you for all who are tuning into this. Haven't been able to do this in the past week. I've been traveling in Italy with the family, a little graduation kind of trip, and it's been amazing. I'm actually here right now, getting some downtime, 6 hours ahead, and Connor and I made it work. So we're back on the air, and we're going to be talking all things draft trades. Little brief minute or two about the finals since we didn't get a chance to do that. So if you want to skip over 2 or 3 minutes right now, you can if you want to just get straight to the draft stuff. But we're back on the air and we're ready to talk draft stuff. So Connor, just to start out real quick, we talked finals. Cavs actually did it. I can't believe it. Even though I picked 5-6 correctly, I did think Dubs are going to pull out Game 7 just in regards to legacy and just impacts of what we just watched. What are you thinking right now in terms of how this is all going to be evaluated down the line?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it does is it takes those people that were still trying to find things to destroy LeBron about, and it just kicks them to the side because there was nothing before this. There was no reason to take him down before this. But, I mean, now all the reason is gone. He has 3 titles. He's been to 7 straight finals. He just beat the best regular season team of all time. There's just nothing you can take away from him anymore, and now he can do whatever he wants. Just try to get that tally up a little bit higher, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm very happy about that because you knew even if the Cavs did not pull this out, you knew that LeBron was going to get that criticism, even though based on the performances we watched, we knew that that wasn't warranted. And it wasn't warranted last year. It wasn't warranted any of the years aside from 2011, where he did, in fact, collapse against the Dallas Mavericks. Aside from that, it was not warranted. But, getting that ring does make the difference. And not only did he get it, he got it against the team that put together the best regular season of all time. And I think that Warriors collapse you can attribute to a lot of things. And not even a collapse, so to speak. They took the Cavs to 7 games. They were up 3-1. They couldn't pull it out. You mentioned the Draymond Green Game 5 suspension is one thing. I do really think that Steph Curry is banged up, and he said post-game after Game 7 he's not going to get surgery. I think he's going to get knee surgery because what I watched is a superstar player, a 2-time league MVP, who was unable to get into the paint at will, which is something that makes his game so great. Everyone, you analyze Steph Curry and you say, all right, this guy can shoot the 3 better than anyone we've ever seen from any sort of distance. But Steph Curry, a lot of his game is also being able to penetrate and kick the ball out. The ball kind of moves around the perimeter until it finds someone for an open 3 or an easy layup. That's how the Warriors play ball offensively. But when Steph can't do that, a large part of your offense is taken out of the way. And I think that was something that really troubled the Warriors. Even if Steph was putting up 30, even more in some games, if he's not able to dish the ball as well as he usually is, just based on penetrating to the hole, I think that's a lot of your team taken away. So I think Steph's banged up. I think LeBron obviously came to play. Kyrie came to play. The little guys in the Cavs stepped up. Tristan stepped up. Kevin Love even getting a stop down the stretch. And here we are, Cleveland Cavaliers, NBA champions. And it's a great story for the city of Cleveland, for LeBron. Now people, I think, can start to properly evaluate LeBron based on, how great of an all-time player he is.
Yeah, and you mentioned a bunch of things. There's just so much to digest from the outcome. Curry was hurt, yes, but he was also really bad. He just played bad basketball in general, made some really bad decisions coming off pick and rolls. You got to give credit to Tristan Thompson and Kevin Love, guys like that, who coming off the pick and roll, they're able to switch onto him, and typically he can do a little shake and get open for a 3, but he couldn't do it that series. Klay Thompson disappeared down the stretch in Game 7. Draymond Green was huge in Game 7, but he cost them Game 6. And their bench was bad. Harrison Barnes was really bad. Festus Ezeli, those two just didn't look like they knew how to play basketball at times. And, when they're keys to their team, they're the Splash Brothers, their bench, and then their team defense struggled when Bogut went out and Iguodala was hurt. So a lot of things just didn't go their way, and they just didn't play well enough. And Kyrie Irving was amazing. Tristan Thompson was really good. And if LeBron James gets a little bit of help, he's going to win 4 games out of 7 most times. And I think that's what it came down to.
And the thing for me is you talk about, one quick thing in regards to Harrison Barnes. Not only was he bad, he was historically bad. In the fourth quarter of Game 7, he was able to get some shots to fall. But aside from that, there was a stretch between Games 5, 6, and 7 where he was like 4 for 28 or something to that effect. He was brutal.
Wide open shots, too.
Wide open shots, and this is someone that we're talking about potentially getting a max contract, someone that just got named onto the USA Olympic basketball roster today, which, just to sidetrack, I do think that's a good decision based on someone knowing how to play in their role, add that to a 12-man roster. But that being said, in regards to what he did in the finals, he did disappear, and that is a fact. He absolutely disappeared, did not come to play, and that is a question mark, and that is something that definitely hurt the Warriors. But you talk about lasting impacts of this series. How are we going to remember this series? We're going to remember that Game 7. And the one thing for me is that as great as that was, as great as was to see LeBron have that iconic shot block of Iguodala, see Kyrie hit that big three, I don't think the game itself was that well played, and I think that's something that's going to get lost in translation here.
Particularly the last 5 minutes of Game 7.
Yeah, it was like a 6-minute stretch. The Warriors didn't score. I mean, it was really bad basketball. It was fun to watch it go down like that, but it was pretty brutal basketball. So when we talk about all-time great games, yeah, was it fun? Was it exhilarating? Well, let's not act like this game was some sort of masterpiece. It was pretty bad basketball. There was, in a day and age when scoring happens, it's such a high clip, when we're seeing these lightning-like offenses, especially that of the two teams that played, put up 110, 120 points even in some games. We saw a 93-89 Game 7. But was it fun? Absolutely. Am I happy the way it turned out? Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, it was definitely exciting. And just like one more thing to wrap, I think the Warriors in general, you said maybe they didn't blow it, but obviously they blew it, but no one's ever lost up 3-1. So I think that's a pretty big deal. And a lot of that is to do with the Warriors kind of caught up to themselves in the fact that they're so loose with the ball, particularly Curry. I mean, Draymond is out there doing his shenanigans, things he's done all year. But when you get in the playoffs and one more flagrant point takes you out, something like Game 5 that has to be recognized as just a bonehead error. And then, the talk post-game when they're talking in the press conferences and Klay Thompson saying it's a man's game. He's worried about LeBron and his feelings. Steve Kerr and all of them are saying, all we want, we're comfortable home at Game 7. That's all we need. And they just seemed way too comfortable for me that somehow they were going to win. And then it wasn't really until Curry misses that three that they're like, shit, we're in trouble here. So I think, they were just a little bit too confident, and they thought they could get away with things, like a behind-the-back pass in the fourth quarter from Curry, nitpicking a little bit. But these are the kinds of things that don't win you finals games, and that was ultimately the Warriors' downfall, in my opinion.
In their last 31 games between end of the regular season and the playoffs, Golden State Warriors went 20-11. So let's not forget that down the stretch, this Warriors team, I don't know if it's run out of steam or how you want to put it, but this was not the team that we saw absolutely steamroll through much of the regular season, really the entirety of it in large part. But just in regards to the one final point I want to make of this, in terms of if this was a bigger finals than ever for like one player's legacy, as much as we're going to talk about what LeBron did, I still will say, and I was thinking about this right before we started recording this, that we forget this, but until Kobe won that finals in 2009, he was thought of as an entirely different player in terms of as a superstar, because his first 3 titles were seen as, at least at that point, he won off the back of Shaquille O'Neal. Even though he put up monster stats, he still had Shaq to help him. And then in 2008, he couldn't put out the Celtics. Once he won that one, even though he had Pau Gasol with him, that was the first title Kobe won himself. And I think that was big. I have to go help someone real quick, but go for it, Connor.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely important. The thing about LeBron James that I think a lot of people don't understand, I mean, you can't, in today's NBA, you cannot win a finals by yourself. So I think that idea is a little bit skewed, Kobe's weren't as valid when he had Shaq. But, in today's NBA, no one's ever going to win a finals by themselves. And Kyrie Irving is really freaking good. He was the number 1 pick, consensus, having played only 8 games or 11 games in college for a reason. So he just had to find it a little bit he's an all-NBA kind of player. Maybe he won't make that team because there's so many good point guards, but he's really, really skilled. And, yeah, LeBron didn't do it by himself here. You can't win these things by yourself. That's my opinion. I think you need like 3 stars to win today, and they showed that. But obviously, it was a lot of good individual play from LeBron and good leadership. He likes to call himself the leader and take control of that title, but he did it. At the end of the day, no one can knock him. He got the job done. You win twice in Golden State in elimination games, and his legacy's cemented. I mean, no one can ever have him outside their probably top 10. Maybe we're biased because we're watching him now. We didn't see guys like Oscar and Magic and guys like that, but you can't take anything away from this guy. He can only go up from here, and it was just amazing to watch him perform down the stretch and get his team a title and his city, which was also really, really cool to watch.
Yeah, definitely the Cleveland thing. I mean, we saw people jumping on fire trucks. There was all sorts of shenanigans going on. J.R. Smith walking around without his shirt on for 2-3 straight days.
And he was big for them too.
Yeah, JR, he dropped, I think, 20
couple big threes
in Game 5, and he hit the 2 big threes in Game 7. Of course, we saw him right after that have a few lapses, but JR being JR, he made the key plays when he needed to, and he proved that he was worth not only just being included in the Shumpert trade, but he was, at the end of the day, the takeaway from that trade, now that you look back on it. The Knicks have a second-round pick that they're eventually going to have, I think, 2019. Shump's not even been that effective this year, and JR is a key cog to now a championship roster. But you move on from the finals, and now you look, okay, it is draft time in full swing. Went through the NBA draft. We're going to break that down for you. And also, lots of trades. And this year, this offseason, is going to have more trades than we've ever seen, at least in terms of big-name stars, because of how the cap is rising. Cap's going to be set at $94 million per team. And that's about double what it was not too long ago. It's really skyrocketing to the point where we're talking about Harrison Barnes getting, over $20 million. And we just talked about how he really did not come to play in those NBA finals. So that's what we're going to see. And because of that, draft picks become more valuable than ever, because even though the cap's rising, how much players are going to make coming into the league as rookies on their rookie deals does not change much. So they're in some ways getting screwed out of a lot of money. But for teams, it's extremely beneficial and valuable to have players in the first round. Even if it's someone you got to develop over time, that's someone that is making a couple $1 million when, in the past, players weren't making as much that have been in the league for a while. Now they're making crazy kinds of money, and it kind of changes the game a bit. But that's why these trades are bigger more than ever.
Yeah, the trades are everything, and you see all these teams handling their assets. Obviously, Boston was a big display of that. Everyone really just waiting for them to strike that big deal. So assets are good as long as you get something out of them. And those teams in rebuilding mode are going to continue to try and get assets, get picks, get young guys, things like that. And, yeah, it's a big part of the draft. Teams are trying to move up and get their guy. This particular draft was a 2-player draft in terms of transcendent kind of guys, and the rest is all based on upside. And, most people think the rest of the draft after 1 and 2 are role players. But, I mean, there are going to be outliers. Obviously, we'll see how it shakes out. But, yeah, assets flying around all night, a lot of hectic stuff. And it was entertaining to watch as a basketball fan.
Yeah, when we talk about value in the draft, I think now the quintessential pick that you look at is Draymond Green was taken 35th overall a few years back, and now look what he's doing is Olympic basketball player, and now one of the best players in the league. I would say top 15. You could definitely make the case in terms of what he is in the league, and he was taken as a second-round pick. But
I think it's so funny how everyone now is trying to compare players to Draymond Green, as if that's a thing. I hear people trying to compare Denzel Valentine to Draymond Green. Okay, they both went to Michigan State. Anyone who has length and plays defense and can maybe pass a little bit, they're trying to say is Draymond Green. I think that's absurd. He's a great player, but there's not another Draymond Green out there, in my opinion.
I think that's a fair point. I like that. Yeah, I like when people try to make these crazy comparisons. I mean, LeBron.
Some make sense, but not that one.
I mean, LeBron even said that, when you just talk about him with him and Jordan comparison. It's look, there's not another LeBron James. There's not another Michael Jordan. They're different kinds of players. And that's especially with Draymond Green, kind of people try to recreate that in terms of a smaller 4, even 5 in his case, that can do all these different things similar to a 5-tool player in baseball. But there still is a major difference. And you're not going to take a mid first round pick who happened to go to the same school and say, oh, okay, that's the same player. That's very similar. No, I mean, they have similar schools. They played, I mean, similar isn't the exact same. They played for the same stellar coach. But that aside, don't see the similarities per se. But you never know. Maybe he is Draymond Green 2.0, but I think that's a ridiculous comparison. But now, but now as we, kind of move past that, we'll talk about the deals first. I think the pre-draft and I guess during the draft deals, I think they made more headlines than the actual picks themselves because 1 and 2 were locked. We knew Ben Simmons was going to Philly first overall. We knew the Lakers were about to get Ingram. And then after that, there wasn't that much of a surprise, I'd say. I think after the first 8, the draft really tailed off. But the pre-draft picks were crazy. And we'll start that. Derrick Rose coming to the Big Apple. Knicks getting D Rose, and then going through the entirety of the deal, Justin Holiday and a 2017 second-round pick from the Bulls. Bulls getting Robin Lopez, and he's got a bunch of years left on that contract still. 3 years left on that, making 12.5 a year. So good value pick from the center position. Then Calderon on an expiring deal, and then Jerry Grant on a rookie deal, someone that maybe can make an impact. And the fun thing about this is his uncle Horace played for the Bulls a little bit. You know, he kind of made an impact there, I think you could say. So get a little family tree going there. But just we'll run through our opinions on this deal. And at least the way I see it to start out, it's a win-win for the Knicks because at least for right now, you get rid of Calderon. And that's just something that was really, plaguing the team a little bit. Not too much money, but more than you would have liked when you're trying to attract free agents. And you get a flyer on Derrick Rose, free up some cap room. So in large part, I think there's not too much to be concerned about in that sense, just how Derrick Rose plays going forward.
Yeah, I think going into this offseason, they've just had nothing to be excited about. And Carmelo's kind of held them hostage in the fact that they're not going to get enough players just because of his contract and the fact that people don't want to come play with him. They're not going to get enough players to really compete for a title while he's there, I feel like. And they mortgaged like their whole future to get him. They mortgaged Wilson Chandler, Gallinari, a lot of good players. So until he's gone, I don't think they can fully rebuild. So for now, it's like you kind of got to be that fringe team that's competing in the East. And Derrick Rose he might be that guy. I mean, this is a second chance for him. He won the MVP. He's a quality player. And anyone's an upgrade from what they had at point guard last year. So from that perspective, I think it's fine. Although Lopez was really good for them last year. So they lose depth in the front court a little bit. They bring over a guy with health risks. And they give up Jaren Grant, who's a good prospect. So obviously they're slowing down the rebuild. But they're going to probably give themselves a chance to hover around 500 and compete in the East, which is, the fans want to see them in the playoffs. And there's more of a chance they make the playoffs with Rose than with the other guys, I think.
And those are all very fair points. The two things that I do question about the deal, I'd say I'm probably, in terms of for the Knicks, I think 80%, all right, very right on. There's I guess 2 little things that stick out to me. One is more of a minor thing, but it's just a philosophical issue. Okay, past 2 years, you've traded away mid-first round picks that you've taken. Hardaway last year to Atlanta to get Jerry Grant, and now you trade away Jerry Grant, who one of the biggest issues with him was the fact that he didn't get a chance to play as much because, for whatever reason, Kurt Rambis, who was god-awful as a coach, and I think everyone could attest to that, there really isn't anyone aside from Phil Jackson that has publicly supported this guy. He was brutal as head coach of that team once D. Fish was let go, but Jerry Grant did not get to play, so you don't know what you're going to see from him. 4 years at Notre Dame. Well, 1 year he was suspended, but he had a lot of miles on him from Notre Dame. We saw what he did at that level, and there were some flashes we saw from him during his 1 year in New York, and for a Chicago team that I think needs to fully rebuild. That's a nice little addition for them. Again, as we talked about, player who's going to be on the cheap for the next 3 years, not paying him all that much. Let him possibly develop because now you have him, and the Knicks let that go. Other big thing is okay, you bring in Derrick Rose, and yeah, the health thing aside, yeah, you know that's the biggest thing. You know that he needs to be healthy to succeed on the court. But even if we saw Derrick Rose from last year, maybe even a little better, the issue still lies, how are they going to share the ball enough with this team? Because you know Derrick Rose is a point guard that is obviously score first, but he needs the ball in his hand a lot to succeed. And that's fine with him and Melo alone. If it was just those two, but you want Kristaps Porzingis because that's your long-term talent right there. That is who you need to build around because he's what's eventually going to win you or potentially put you in that championship consideration because he really is something special. We saw that last year. As long as he stays healthy, he could be just that. So to build a team where now Porzingis, in terms of how much he's getting the ball, just right now based on the current roster, the third option, and for a team that's trying to go out there and get more free agents, is a little questionable. I know they want to win right now. And, you know, you could still do that if on some planet you do get Kevin Durant, which is not going to happen. Let's be real here. It's not going to happen. But by some chance, you know, let's say even if it's a lesser free agent, if they get Dwight Howard, which is what they're talking about, I think zero chance that happens. Don't see why he would want to come there and be the fourth option on that team offensively. But even so, Porzingis needs to get enough touches to be effective. Yeah, he can do a lot of stuff without the ball, but you need to really capitalize on what you have in Kristaps Porzingis. And now sharing the ball is going to be interesting to see how it works out. Maybe it works itself out. You don't know that what Jeff Hornacek's going to do. He's worked magic with guards in the past in Phoenix. Maybe he can turn Derrick Rose around and use his ability to get to the hole to penetrate and, you know, have him kick out a little more with all the shooters you have in Melo and Porzingis. Still got a lot of work to do in free agency. But those are the two question marks. But in terms of the deal itself, it's 1 year. So it doesn't hold you up long term. You talked about Melo being kind of an uncertain future. I think at some point, unless this really, really works out, you're going to have to deal him, which is why a Conley approach.
Yeah, we've been saying that for so long, though.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't think they're ever going to get rid of Carmelo, and I think until he's gone, they can't fully go in that next direction.
Well, they're not going to get rid of him until he wants to leave because he's got the no trade clause. And I think the only scenario he ever leaves is if he plays with one of his buddies or two of his buddies or even all three, and LeBron, D. Wade, and Chris Paul. Other than that, he loves New York and the marketing aspects of it, and he wants to win in New York too, but he loves New York. But go on.
Yeah, no, I just think it's a fine trade in terms of you get an upgrade at point guard. No matter who you're bringing in there, it's an upgrade. But, yeah, I mean, you still have to round out the roster. You got to be patient and wait and see what they do in free agency. I don't think Dwight Howard makes the situation any better. Someone like Lopez was the perfect guy to put next to Porzingis, someone who's going to do the dirty work, get rebounds, you know, average double-doubles. But, yeah, they need Porzingis to have the ball. That's going to be tough with two ball-dominant guys, but they upgraded their talent quite a bit. So I'm not going to be surprised if they win 40, 45 games. Still not going to be surprised if they win 35 because you don't know what you're going to get out of Derrick Rose. And if he plays 60, 65-plus games, I think you're happy with the trade.
Yeah, and the thing with that, though, is who the Knicks should get someone of that Lopez build with this team. I agree with that 100%. Like you said, you got to trade somebody. And the question with Joakim Noah is his health. Because if he was somehow all better physically, he's got a lot of wear and tear on him from all those years playing with Tibbs and being one of those guys so aggressive. You saw what happened to Luol Deng for a while, kind of a little bit of a mini resurgence last year for him. But his career really fell off, like dropped right off a peak with all those years, all those miles on him. You forget Luol Deng's like only just like low 30s. I think he's like 31. Like he's a very young guy. But, you know, he seems a lot older because of how hard he played for Tibbs for all those years. But with Joakim Noah, he is someone that fits that mold tremendously. Plus, he's an excellent passer. So that is the kind of player you'd love to have in New York, to play alongside Porzingis at that 5. You know, and in some lineups you have Melo at the 4 because Melo is very effective at that 4. And that's the question. Porzingis at this point isn't really – we haven't seen him be able to play the 5 yet, but – if somehow he could transition to that would be interesting with Melo at the 4. But I don't think that's exactly where he fits. He's a 4 that can do a lot of things that guards do, which is why he's such an effective player. But you need a center that's willing to do the dirty work, that doesn't demand the ball, that won't get upset if they're not scoring that many points or not even getting that many touches in a game. Robin Lopez had that kind of attitude, and he didn't need the ball to be effective. He can do so many things on the floor. So for the Knicks, they have to now find that on a deal that they can afford. And definitely, that's why I don't think Dwight Howard's the answer, because he was getting a little annoyed in Houston. And by a little, I mean, a decent amount from what we've read. That interview on TNT he did, I think a month back now, it didn't work out with him and James Harden, because James Harden needed the ball in his hands at all times to be effective. And Dwight Howard was kind of just waiting there for the ball to come to him or to get a rebound or a putback. So how is that going to work in New York with Derrick Rose, Melo, and Porzingis all needing the ball more than Dwight Howard? So that's why that's not going to work. And a healthy Joakim Noah would be perfect for this team if they really want to compete. But that's a big risk, and you already have the Derrick Rose injury risk on your hands. Don't see how they can do that unless you have real medical certainty that Joakim Noah is all healthy, ready to go, and it's not any chronic injuries with him.
Yeah, I think that's all important. Maybe want to transition to the Nets trade, because the other New York team got rid of Thad Young for the 20th pick, I believe.
Yep, 20th,
So,
Karis LeVert.
As a Nets fan, what's your outlook on that? Obviously, they're going in the direction of more tanking, more rebuilding. It doesn't really make sense because they have no reason to get rid of Thad Young. There's no picks in the future. There's no reason to tank, really. Maybe they just saw a guy at that 20 spot they like. But what's your outlook on that move?
I don't think it had to do with that. I don't think they knew exactly who they would get at that point. I think the thing with Sean Marks is what he's trying to do is take advantage in any way that you can of this current period they have of where, like you said, they don't have a draft pick, and they kind of have, kind of a dead period here where you're not going to win anytime soon. It's all about player development at this point. And I don't know how I feel about the pick of Karis LeVert just because of all the injuries he's had. We know that when he's healthy, he's someone that can, be a volume scorer that can really contribute. He's a 6'7" shooting guard. So if he is healthy, you like what you see in him. But 2 straight years of injuries in college, to take him at that point is a little suspect to me. I was hoping for Deontay Davis of Michigan State. He didn't go till early second, the first pick of the second round. He fell off the board a lot. Don't know the reason for that. But regardless, the reason Thad Young is gone, as much as I love him, he was definitely my favorite net on the team. And he's the kind of guy that makes any team, any single team he's on, he is a good fit on any team because of his versatility. He's a 4, but he can do so many different things on the court, playing outside and inside, defends crazy hard, tremendous attitude, and most importantly, in terms of his fit on any team, very affordable deal. The Nets have him at around the $12 million mark for the next 3 years. They had him, and now he's going to Indy on that. And especially with the cap rising, for someone of Thad Young's caliber, to be a 4th option on a team, which is what he's going to be in Indiana, absolutely fabulous deal for them, especially with the Jeff Teague now being your point guard. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But makes all the sense in the world for Indiana. With the Nets, it frees up that money, which, granted, it's not a lot of money, but now the Nets, who already had a lot of cap room coming into this free agency period, now you get rid of Thaddeus Young, who, yeah, he's an effective player. He's not that old. He's 27. But you're not winning anytime soon. So a player like that, having him on the team now, doesn't do much aside from serve as a mentor role. The only thing with that is I did wish they kept on to him another year longer, because I think even next year that value becomes increased with seeing the cap raise even more. We don't know how much it's going to rise to. And this year it was projected to be at 92. It rose up to 94. So if next year, when it's supposed to really boom and max contract's going to go for over $30 million a year, that's when he's even more valuable. So I think they sold him early, but I think Sean Marks wants to literally turn this into a way where it's not like what Philly was doing and essentially tanking, but he wants to develop these young players. You hire Kenny Atkinson, who's noted for his player development skills. He wants to develop his talent right away. And having Thad Young play, a hard, scrappy player that yeah, he'll put up 15 points a game on a team that's not going anywhere, get some value for him. So I understand the philosophy, but I'm not exactly pleased with the pick just because of the injury risk. And I wish they had waited till maybe the trade deadline or even next offseason, where the situation's no different. You're still a losing team trying to work its way from, the gutter to the utter dumps of the basketball world. Work your way up back to playoff contention and up to real contention. So I don't think, getting rid of Thad Young right now changes anything like that. But they wanted a first. They didn't have a single first-round pick this year. So now you get one. They still have their first-round pick next year. Just, you get a swap with the Celtics. So the Celtics get the Nets pick next year. The Nets have the Celtics pick. So I understand it from that standpoint of, just wanting a first-round pick. But I think Thad Young was more valuable than they got rid of him for. But that's history. Makes sense on both sides. Just not all that pleased with the pick until he gets on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing exciting about it. I agree with pretty much everything you said. From the Nets standpoint, this is where they are. And this is the guy they brought in, Spurs guy. He knows what he's doing. Sean Marks knows what he's doing. Kenny Atkinson is that player development guy, like you said. So this period is a time to try and get better, to try and take young guys. And LeVert's a really talented guy. He's had injuries, but, I mean, I think I heard they had their team doctor look at him, or he did surgery on him or something. So they had a good idea of who they were getting with that pick and what his health status was. So they're not trying to go anywhere far in the next couple of years, just trying to take some young guys, get them a little better. The next logical step is going to be probably Brook Lopez, which maybe for once at this trade deadline they'll get rid of him, but we don't know. So they're in a state of rebuilding. They're in that rebuilding mode, and this is another move that contributes to that. Maybe they could have waited a little longer and got some better value. But, I mean, you're happy for Thad Young. Let him get to a place where he can play and compete for the playoffs, and you bring in a guy who you feel good about, and you can try and help him take the team to the next level.
The one funny thing about that is actually Thad Young wanted to stay in Brooklyn. He's actually the first professional athlete to own a home in Brooklyn since the Brooklyn Dodgers days. He recently purchased a home in Brooklyn. His wife was on Twitter all day during, when the Woj reports first went out that Thad Young was probably going to be on the move. She's like, please don't do it. And I think right afterwards, she quoted the tweet and put whelp in there. So the Young family did not want to leave Brooklyn, which as a Nets fan is something, you could be happy about. I have so much respect for Thad Young. But you knew his days were numbered, even if Sean Marks said that you want to use him as a building block. He's a smart guy, and he knows that Thad Young, as great of an attitude as he has, as much as he brings to the table, night in, night out, he's still a guy that's not going to help you in the long run simply because you're not winning during the next 3 years. You're just not. Why not get value for him? The issue, again, like I said, is get more value for him later. Let him play another year in Brooklyn. Let him mentor some more guys. But you have Chris McCullough they want to start working with now that he's finally healthy again. We'll see. It's going to be a long one for the Nets. That's the bottom line. Yeah, that Indy team will be good, though, and that actually is a nice segue from Thad Young going to, the great point guard swap of 2016. Indiana getting Jeff Teague from Atlanta, George Hill going to Utah, Utah throwing that 12th overall pick that was used on Taurean Prince out of Baylor, Atlanta's way. And I think this is really the quintessential trade that every team in it got what they needed. You look at Indiana. They got a step up at point guard. George Hill was always that, he's a solid filler guy. He's a veteran. He makes the right plays. But he's not going to put you into serious contention alone. And Indiana was a team that needed a better point guard. You get Jeff Teague, who, he's an upper tier point guard. I think with how many good point guards there are, I don't think he's top 10, but he's definitely top 15. He's the above average point guard. And that's now a strength for you. The point guard position is not a question. It is a strength for you. An Indiana team, we saw Paul George. He's back fully healthy and then some. Monte Ellis is a nice fit in the backcourt. You have a Jeff Teague, Monte Ellis backcourt, throw in that Thad Young deal, and then Miles Turner, who showed some good things throughout the year. That's a pretty good starting five, who at least next year the expectation should at least be to get to the second round of the Eastern Conference, I think, at this point, with what they put together alone just on Indiana's side. We'll break down Utah and Atlanta's side in a minute, but just in terms of how the Pacers look right now, Connor, they're a team that should be in the upper, top 4 of the Eastern Conference with the way they have constructed this team. And credit to Larry Bird for getting Jeff Teague and Thad Young, and all he gave up was George Hill, the 20th overall pick this year, and a future second-round pick.
Yeah, losing George Hill, it hurts them on the defensive end a little bit, but Larry Bird was trying – this offense was really lacking, and that's what it comes down to. And you bring in 2 guys that can put the ball in the hoop. Thad Young and Jeff Teague can both do that, and now you give Miles Turner an opportunity to start at center, somewhere where in 2016 he's going to be really good at that spot. They're going to have a nice small ball kind of team that could compete with those Western Conference teams if they ever sniff the finals, which I don't think they're going to do that, but it's definitely a good move for Larry Bird for the Pacers. They round out a good top 5. They're going to have to work on the rest of their team because Jan Mahimi is probably going to want to leave now because he's not going to have that starting center role anymore. But, yeah, no, it's a pretty good deal for them. Atlanta brings in another versatile guy at that 3-and-D kind of spot with Taurean Prince. And George Hill's in Utah, is that right?
Yep, he's going to Utah.
So, yeah, they desperately need a point guard because you don't know what you're getting out of Exum and Trey Burke. So that's a little bit of stability for them there. So you mentioned it. It's really good for all sides. Indiana loses a little bit on defense, but they get that much better on offense. So I think it's a good move for them.
Yeah, and then Atlanta getting that pick, Taurean Prince. One comparison I heard to him, and again, we talked about how comparisons are ridiculous, but just based on the kind of player you're looking for, Damari Carroll was a big loss for them 2 years ago, and we saw that as much as Kent Bazemore did fill a role last year, he proved that he could score the ball at a decent clip. He didn't bring that defensive presence, that kind of do-it-all attitude that Damari Carroll did, especially with the frame too. Versatility in this day and age of basketball. You can play a little 4 if need be. You do things all over the court, perimeter, all over the place. Taurean Prince is that kind of player, it seems like, at least from where some of the scouts are looking at him as. Again, it's a draft pick, you don't know, but you're getting that kind of potential, and you're losing Jeff Teague, who realistically they didn't plan on re-signing. They got Dennis Schroeder right there, and now he's ready to start at point guard. So he was in the wings anyway. He was waiting for Jeff Teague to be out. That was, at this point, it seemed to be a foregone conclusion that Jeff Teague would not be there after this year. Get something for him. You get a lottery pick for him. That's certainly something. And now you have Dennis Schroeder at the point. You had the financial flexibility to re-sign Al Horford. And where they're going, Cleveland runs the East. Atlanta's best case scenario, unless something crazy happens this offseason, is conference finals like they did 2 years ago. But this trade certainly helps them towards that. Gave them that extra draft pick, gave them a lottery pick. And like we said, all sides get who they want. Indiana, they already said they're going to re-sign Jeff Teague to a long-term deal. Fun fact, he's from Indianapolis. That's also a little fun element of this deal. He goes back to his hometown. Everyone loves a good hometown return story. Even though Melo he was born in Brooklyn, but he's lived most of his years as a child in Baltimore. But that was the old homecoming thing. Everyone loves that. Obviously, LeBron to Cleveland, the biggest one. But it's a fun deal on all sides. The biggest draft day deal, though, the absolute biggest, Serge Ibaka going to Orlando. I was up in Italy here, as I mentioned. I'm in Italy for the next half a week. I was here in Rome watching the draft on my computer on the vertical on Yahoo's little draft day coverage, which I really enjoyed. To give them a little plug.
Me too.
They had so you watched that at home, Connor? You were watching that one?
Yeah, I was going all out. I had the ESPN one muted. I don't even know why I had it on my TV, and then I had the Yahoo on my computer. Those guys do such a good job. I mean, when it comes down to it, you understand that ESPN, they can't really discuss the trades and the things that are going on that are reported until they happen. And it's just not something they do because they don't want to take away the entertainment value. But with Adrian Wojnarowski and Chris Mannix and those guys, they just do a really good job, and you get the information as soon as it happens. And for, the intense NBA fan, that's what you want. And they did a good job, and I really enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, and I think your approach actually made sense. And just on a little interesting thing here, the lights in this hotel I'm at, I'm in the business area, they kind of automatically turn out when you don't have your room key in a certain amount of time. So I'll be kind of half in the dark the rest of the way out for those watching. But in terms of your approach, I like that because you get to watch the ESPN coverage in terms of what the players are wearing. You get to see them walk up to the podium, shake Adam Silver's hand, but you get all the insight. Tom Crean did an amazing job. I was surprised at how good of an analyst he was. He really broke the game down on so many different levels. And from, when they'd have him over at the video board every so often, breaking down a player's game, he really knew the ins and outs of what he was talking about. I really enjoyed Tom Crean on there. And then the other guys on there, they had Mike Schmitz from Draft Express, and he does like these video breakdowns all the time. That's what he's known for. He'll break down like 20-minute like YouTube video breakdowns of these players. He was pretty good too. You could see that he hasn't been on air that much. There were definitely kind of, it's a little different because a lot of the guys. That's the thing. Credit. A lot of the guys on there, they're essentially bloggers in the sense they're writing for Yahoo. But once it got more comfortable, the show was tremendous in terms of the insight you got. You've heard about the trades first. It was perfect. It was exactly what I wanted for my coverage. But what I was going back to here, I kind of sidetracked tremendously. But I was up in Rome draft started at 7:30? So 1:30 a.m., 6-hour time difference. I stayed up through the Nets pick. So I was up till 4 a.m., had a tour of the Vatican the next day. So at a very early time, I had a 9 a.m. tour. So I was running on by the time I actually had to get up and get there and stuff, 2.5 hours sleep. But I wanted to watch the draft coverage. So I was up watching, and the Serge Ibaka pick blew my mind because I was like, all right, I hope to see one big deal today. The Thad Young deal happened before the draft. I was like, all right, let's hope we can get one during the draft that I'm staying up for, that I'm wasting precious sleep for. I was going to do it anyways, but Serge Ibaka getting traded to Orlando and OKC getting Oladipo, Ilyasova, and the 11th overall pick, which turned into Domantas Sabonis. Love that pick, by the way. I love this deal for OKC. I'll just put it out there. I said on Twitter that they flat out robbed Orlando. And some people feel one way. I think in large part, a lot of people do feel like OKC won this deal by a significant margin, forgetting all that just for Serge Ibaka, who's got 1 year left on his deal. And based on what they're going to have to pay to KD and Westbrook, assuming they can get both of those guys like they want to, there's not room there for Serge Ibaka seeking a max deal with Enes Kanter already on the hook for 17+ mil for the next few years. Steven Adams eventually commanding big money, so on and so forth. So I love the deal for OKC. I think Presti hit a home run.
Yeah, I'd been flip-flopping on this one for so long. I think when I looked at it initially, I was like, I didn't know what Oklahoma City was doing because I don't think this makes them better. I don't think this gives them a better chance to win the championship, which is what I think you're worried about when Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook have their free agency looming. But, looking at it long term, and that's what Sam Presti does, and he's a brilliant basketball mind, it's definitely better for them because they weren't probably going to re-sign Ibaka. They couldn't afford him when he's a free agent next year. And I don't know. It's interesting because they needed that wing guy who could knock down shots, and they definitely didn't get that in Oladipo. They got a guy who's kind of a lockdown defender, improving his jump shot, plays really hard, a guy you like. And Ilyasova is a guy he was almost a borderline 6-man of the year down the stretch last year. Really good player. Don't know what Sabonis is. He doesn't have great length. He was a pretty good player in college. I think they won in terms of assets and depth, which is something they really needed. But I'm not so sure Oklahoma City got that much better.
Well, I'd kind of disagree on that because
I
wouldn't say, it's going to be a little kind of back and forth here. I wouldn't say that much better because Serge Ibaka does so much. But just in terms of logistics, just to start off, then I'll go into why I think that OKC did, in fact, get better. Just logistically, if they're not able to retain Ibaka, you get something for him. And I was reading Zach Lowe's column that he recently put up on ESPN about an hour before we got on and recorded this, which is right now, obviously, that was dumb to say. But I was reading Zach Lowe, and he had some good points on both sides of it. At the moment, he's of the belief that OKC won this, but his question is, by how much and whatnot. But a lot of other guys in similar situations, you look at that, recent trades, that they had to give up a lot less than Orlando did to get Ibaka. You can even make the case the Harden deal to give away James Harden. I mean, OKC did not get nearly anywhere as close to as much as they got in this one because of the similarities of that deal, or that looming free agency star player in like a big three that you're not going to be able to resign, and you have to dish money out elsewhere. So you factor in that, and it makes sense. And in terms of the logistics of this trade alone, why it works for the team, why they're better. Oladipo, lockdown defender, you had that in Robertson at the 2. You had that in him. But Oladipo can hit shots, and he's not a great shooter, but he's an effective scorer. But he's someone that can do both, and he's someone that can do it very well. He's someone that plays in a controlled manner, and now you have that legitimate 2 you can start. Waiters was questionable. Yeah, he had a little bit of a good run in the playoffs, you could say. But there were definitely questions about Dion Waiters, and they might not even re-sign him now because he's got free agency coming up. But now you look at the rest of it. Ilyasova, talk about people that are bigs that can shoot the ball. Ilyasova can do just that. So him coming off the bench, he gives you 15, 18 minutes a night. If that's all you need from Ilyasova for 1 year, that makes a lot of sense. Oladipo is still on a rookie contract. He's going to be restricted after this year, so he can't get as much money as some of these other guys are getting. He's not in that situation where he can potentially command a max, which now a max is just percentage of a cap. That's going way up with a guy like Evan Fournier potentially getting that, which is nuts to think about, but that's a reality of the situation. So Oladipo, you're going to be able to re-sign him with the cap going up and him not commanding a max for like on a long-term deal based on not many years in the league. You have that Ilyasova on 1-year flyer. Why not? And then you get a first-round pick in Sabonis that I think could be a valuable big. I like what he did at Gonzaga a lot, and he has a lot of skills that translate well with his ability to rebound, and he's a pretty big guy. Maybe he's not the longest guy, but he's 6'10", 6'11". So you have him as another big off the bench, and regardless, you're getting a first-round pick, a lottery pick. So why not? I don't see the issue with this for Oklahoma City for a guy they're not going to be able to keep. And inserting Oladipo into that starting lineup makes a lot of difference. Now, how they decide to play, I don't know. How they're going to play with this team, it'll be interesting. There's all different lineup combinations you could go. If you want to play Durant at the 4, you could transition Robertson into a 3. I don't know if that's the best approach. Adams and Cantor together, we saw that at times against San Antonio, and it worked out pretty well, so they can do that. Sometimes you can, kind of shape-shift a little bit. You can do all kinds of different things. You can insert Ilyasova into there sometimes. Even though he's not the best defender, he can stretch the floor at the 4, which is useful to have. So there's all sorts of things you could do, but I think this move makes sense on a lot of different levels. Now it's time to go out there and keep Kevin Durant.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's something else they were trying to do, which is why it's also interesting to me. I don't know if this makes it
They had to have it in mind. Absolutely. He had to have been in mind. I mean, you definitely look at that, and whether they consulted him or not, I'm sure he's aired his frustrations or in some sense like what he wants with the team. I don't think he's giving GM advice to Sam Presti. He doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that would do that. But they definitely had him in mind when they made this deal. And you don't know the what's going on in that locker room. So I've read some things that Ibaka doesn't get along with everybody the best. I don't know how much so, but I don't think he's a guy in the locker room that's like, all right, they're really going to miss this guy. James Harden was like that in both the basketball sense and in a locker room sense. He was so tight with all those guys. But I think they'll be fine with that. But, yeah, go on, Connor.
Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know that this makes Kevin Durant more likely to stay. I think Serge Ibaka, he had his moments where, they kind of just stuck him on the perimeter, Kevin Love style, and had him knock down shots, which is not what he wants. Obviously, he wants more shots. But I saw one of the beat writers for Oklahoma City tweeted at some point yesterday that was it. That was the only problem with Ibaka, is that he wanted more shots, said the guys got along in the locker room, and this is just a move they made. If I'm Kevin Durant, this doesn't make me more likely to come back. I think he's probably going to come back anyway just because he has Westbrook and he saw how close they were, and Steven Adams is a really good player. But now you take Ibaka out of that lineup, he's a guy in the Western Conference playoffs down the stretch. He really figured it out, and he was a big reason why they did so well against Golden State. He's a guy who could play both ends. He was huge in that small ball lineup. And I think you're going to have to replace him with Robertson. So do you put Robertson at the 4 now, or you put Robertson at the 3, Durant at the 4? It means a lot more of Enes Kanter, who plays no defense. And just to quickly be fair to you, I think Orlando, it's bad on their part because, again, they're just handing away really talented players. Like Oladipo was – a lot of people thought he was their franchise guy. They got rid of Tobias Harris before for nothing in return. He did great in Detroit. Channing Frye for nothing in return. Was great for Cleveland for a little while. So for Orlando, no idea where they're going. And that's got to be a little frustrating for Frank Vogel. Now they have a mess of 3 big guys in the front court. They got to decide whether Vucevic or Aaron Gordon or Ibaka, who's going to come off the bench. But yeah, for Oklahoma City, I don't think this changes much. It gives them one more good defender, one more shooter, I suppose, in Ilyasova. I think it's just a little bit more depth, but I don't think their talent got significantly better.
The one thing I'll say, and I still say Oklahoma City won this trade by miles just for the reason that they got more than Ibaka was worth. But in terms of bringing him in, I don't entirely dislike the idea for Orlando, too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Orlando shouldn't have brought in Serge Ibaka. I think maybe you could have kept the pick is like my thing. It's the fact that you gave up a pick as well. With an 11th overall pick, you could have done something. Oladipo and Ilyasova, still a little much, but you look at it from their standpoint. Since Dwight Howard's been gone, they've been in that kind of mode where they don't know what they're doing. They're getting high draft picks every single year. But where have they gone to? There's still a team that's in the bottom of the East all these years later. And at this point, yeah, that was Dwight Howard went to L.A. after my senior year of high school. So that's 4 years that Orlando has not been able to really go anywhere. So it gets frustrating for fans. It gets frustrating for the team. They want to win now. Frank Vogel, you bring him in, and let's do something. They trade Tobias Harris, and yeah, in terms of what they actually got in return, not much, but they handed him a contract they really had to match just for letting him walk for nothing in the first place. Tobias Harris got overpaid in the first place, and yeah, he's making noise in Detroit. He's making an impact there, and they're starting 5. But, you know, he was kind of a ball stopper in Orlando, and I think that freeing up cap space by bringing in Brandon Jennings and Ilyasova, Jennings' deal expired. They're not going to re-sign him in free agency. And Ilyasova gone after this year. Now they traded him. That works because you free up $16 million cap space if you want to actually kind of convert your team a little bit. And now you do that in turn by bringing in Serge Ibaka. With Oladipo, yeah, he was the number 2 overall pick. And there are a lot of things I like about him. Great defender, and he has scoring ability, putting up 16 a game. Not going to be an elite scorer, I don't see anytime, but he is definitely someone that can be a third option on a very good team. And now he's just that in Oklahoma City. But now when you look at Orlando's roster, question marks, absolutely. Where do you fit Aaron Gordon? In Zach Lowe's column, which I guess I'll reference a few more times here, he was talking about, could you potentially slide Gordon in the 3 role with Ibaka and Vucevic both being able to shoot the ball? But Ibaka himself fits so well next to Vucevic, making up for his defensive shortcomings. And Ibaka, he has to shoot the ball a little better. He's got to get his 3-point shot back up around that 37% range. It's been down recently. But if he can prove to be someone that can shoot the ball a little better, maybe work on his playmaking skills a little more, and now that he has more touches, has an opportunity to shine more in Orlando, just from a player personnel standpoint, I don't have much of an issue with the deal. I just think you could have bargained that down for a little less, keep that first-round pick. But they still don't win that deal, but it makes sense for them. Now you have room in free agency, and just like kind of scrolling through Twitter throughout this podcast and just things I've been seeing, one option for them in free agency, potentially Chandler Parsons, because he's going to be a free agent. He put up something on Instagram recently. It looks like he's saying something that he opted out of his final year of his deal. He's listening. So he's an Orlando native. You want to talk into possibilities. Why not bring Chandler Parsons in? Does that make you any sort of contender? No, but that's a team that could at least make the playoffs. And I think for this team where you're trying to build, and the only way to go is up at this point, making the playoffs is a good start as the light goes out again because the automatic lights at this hotel. But that's definitely something to keep an eye on, that you now have flexibility with this roster. Let's see what they can do with free agency room. They almost got Paul Millsap last year in free agency. He was between them and Atlanta. Al Horford's a free agent. You still could potentially do that. And they still could move Vucevic, who on his contract, he is worth a lot too, because he's making around 11 mil, I believe. He's not making all that much at all for his scoring ability at the 5, even though he has defensive shortcomings. So you have roster flexibility. You have a player in Serge Ibaka who's been on a championship contender. Let's see what you can do now that you have a coach who's also been on championship contenders.
Yeah, I think it just has to be frustrating as a Magic fan, all the different identities they've gone through. Skiles, obviously, he didn't like Elfrid Payton. He didn't like Mario Hezonja. Didn't like to play those guys. But I think Hezonja is the guy that Orlando really likes. And that's the guy they really want to build their scoring around. And that's why they're okay with letting go of Oladipo. But the big key here is you got to do something to re-sign Serge Ibaka, because he's going to be a free agent after this season. And if you don't re-sign him, then you just gave away 3 players for nothing. So I think that's a big deal. And then, I think they're in an okay spot in terms of they're going to have a roster that they like to play around with a little bit now. You could have Elfrid Payton, Hezonja, maybe Gordon in that 3. If you put him in the 3, that's a pretty versatile front court. He might be a little slow on the defensive end there. Fournier is a free agent, correct?
Yeah, he's restricted free agency, but he's one of those guys.
I don't think they'll match a max for him.
I don't know. I mean, with this team, I mean, he fit very well, and like some of the things I've been reading from a lot of Magic fans, because as much as I like to watch the team on League Pass, I don't watch the Orlando Magic all the time. I just don't. I follow my team, the Brooklyn Nets, a lot. I watch, the main games. I like to follow the Cavs a lot because I like to watch LeBron play, watch a lot of the stars play. I try to watch as much as I can, but I don't have the time, nor do it just logistical for me to watch Orlando all that much. But a lot of the fans that watch them a lot more, they've even mentioned that sometimes they're better, like, with situations where, when you have Fournier in there, you have Hezonja. I think Fournier could be a guy that he could get close to a max. Now, not exactly a max, and especially if a team, and this will be my 3rd Zach Lowe article reference that I just read, but he mentioned that if you're a team it's kind of like in that middle range with a lot of money to spend, with, the shopping spree that's going to occur in free agency, why not at least give him an offer sheet of close to that max, and at least, if nothing else, make Orlando match that. So I think there's a good chance that he ends up with a deal around, crazy it is to say, for Evan Fournier, a guy that a few years ago most casual fans would not have even heard of or known, or even pretty hardcore fans might not have known of when he was in Denver. But he'll command in the high teens, maybe even 20 mil. I think it's crazy, but it's reality.
Yeah. So I think, we probably summed up this trade pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Yeah, that's
both sides. Where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, it's tough to it's tough kind of on the fly when you're just talking basketball. But we'll highlight this draft real quickly. I think we're over an hour now. This is some podcast really making up for lost time. We put out 2 in a short period of time between games before Game 5, before Game 6, and didn't get around to a Game 7 one, and now I'm abroad. But we're gonna make this work. Just a little plug for all those still chugging along here. We're going to do a little pre-free agency podcast coming up. I believe July 1st is probably the day we're looking at. I'll be back stateside by then, so we'll have, ideally, assuming it works out, we'll have a chance to do that and get you all set for free agency. But in terms of the draft itself, look, we knew who the top 2 picks were going to be. That's been set in stone, which is why there wasn't as much drama with this draft. I think the draft itself, you knew what was going to happen. I think the biggest thing was, where's Chris Dunn going to end up playing? Because his name is on the table as a guy that the Celtics really liked, even though they have a bazillion point guards now and an all-star one in that of Isaiah Thomas as well. You have that, and you had teams that were willing to deal for him. Chicago with Jimmy Butler was on the table for Boston, it seemed like at one point, and then Minnesota, who ended up drafting Chris Dunn out of Providence at number 5, even after he was picked by them, and there were talks of how well he'd fit with Karl Anthony Towns and Wiggins and that whole crew, that Tom Thibodeau was still thinking about trading for Jimmy Butler and using Chris Dunn as that, even though he loved Chris Dunn. So that was a lot of drama surrounding that, and I was waiting to see if that would happen. I think at some point Jimmy Butler is going to have to get traded, just with the way Chicago is trending towards. You're not winning with this team. Jimmy Butler's got a little bit of some injury checkered past, and he's not getting any younger. He's a guy that, of course, he's still a young guy per se, but with the way he plays the game, you have to at least think about getting value for him on a contract for a long time if you're not going to win in that time frame. But the draft itself, getting back to that point, after the top 8, kind of fell off for me. A lot of guys that people haven't heard of with like foreign prospects, aside from Jog and Bender, you haven't heard of any of these foreign prospects that were picked. So that was an interesting kind of, characterization of this draft. And after that top 8, after Marquise Chris went to Phoenix, kind of fell off for me. So the picks that people were really excited about were not much drama surrounding them. After that, it was simply picks people didn't care about a lot unless it was your team. But overall, I think the draft went the way you expected to. I think. Would you agree with that? How do you feel about the way this draft went down?
Yeah, I mean, it's a different draft in terms of the prospects that came out of college weren't nearly as good, and that's why the international guys made such a name for themselves. And that has so much to do with the freshman class, because in the one-and-done era, however good the freshman class, the best players from that are going to come out. And this was a year where the seniors were better players like Valentine and Buddy Hield. But, yeah, the freshmen that came out this year, a lot of them were not as ready to play, aside from Simmons and Ingram. So these international guys got a lot of looks. It was interesting to see guys like Scalabissiere fall all the way to 28, has to go to Sacramento, which I'll just touch on. Another terrible draft for them. I mean, they made one good trade initially. They got some assets to move down from 8 to 15, I think. Or 8
13,
to 13, yeah. And then they took a guy who no one had in the lottery and a fourth center when they have so many other needs. So you don't know what language Vlade Divac is speaking up there. It just doesn't make any sense. Thon Maker, 10 to the Bucks. Another weird pick for them. Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of an underwhelming draft. I think I like what Atlanta did. I have like a list of winners and losers here, so I can just like touch on that. I think Atlanta, they got 2 versatile guys in Taurean Prince. Taurean Prince, I don't know how good he's going to be. I love DeAndre Bembry from St. Joseph's. That's a guy who kind of reminds me of Paul Pierce. Like
Okay,
with minus.
We talked about comparisons at the beginning.
Yeah.
Now we're throwing out the truth here. No,
A little bit more athletic, a little bit less adept at shooting threes. After him was Malachi Richardson, who, that was the one trade the Kings looked like they won. It was like, okay. It was like, what, you didn't know what the Charlotte Hornets were doing, taking Bellinelli for the 22nd pick. But, I mean, okay, the Kings, yeah, they're just in a terrible spot. Demarcus Cousins is there still tweeting about the Lord giving him strength and things like that.
Oh, he needs to go. I'm so tired of that nonsense.
They need to trade him for a first round pick at this point. But in terms of other winners, I like what Philly did. You get Ben Simmons, obviously. Everyone knew he was going there. But they got 2 really good international prospects. They got a guy in Timothy Luwawu, who a lot of the guys I was reading said he's a huge steal at that point. He's like a 6'7" wing who can shoot a little bit. And they need guys who can put the ball in the hoop. And if you can develop a couple guys, and they got Korkmaz, another wing. So
I'm sorry, I don't know who these guys.
You don't know these guys.
I believe you that they're legitimate players. I just don't know who these guys are, which is why this draft fell off.
There's so many guys who no one knows in this draft. Yeah. Denver did a good job. They got Malik Beasley late at 19, which was good, and they got Jamal Murray. So they got 2 guards who can really put the ball in the hoop. Murray and Moutier are going to be a nice pair in that backcourt. And they have some young guys who are pretty good in the front court, like Jokic.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess Minnesota, that's another one. They got Chris Dunn. Obviously, they're trending in the right direction. It'll be interesting to see how Dunn and Rubio play together. We don't know if that'll work, whether they trade Rubio. But you got to be happy if you're Minnesota. Buddy Hield, that's exactly what the Pelicans needed. They needed a guy who can just shoot. A lot of people think he's overrated. Some think he's underrated.
Yeah, no, but here's the thing. I mean, all valid points there. For me at this point, what's interesting about this is guys who were high prospects last year. Some of the highest prospects in Scalabissiere is one that really jumps out the most, jumping down all the way late first, 28 overall, when Thon Maker, who that day we didn't know how old he was, and we're still not entirely sure with all the rumors coming out, gets taken 10th overall by the Bucks. which is definitely the most surprising pick of the draft. But what this goes to show, and a lot of the guys on the Yahoo broadcast were saying, don't play college ball. What's the point of doing that? Because you play a year international, you kind of hide your game a little bit. They can't pick you apart. And for someone like Thon Maker with so many question marks, it was surprising to see him go that early. But it speaks to the point that a lot of these guys, that they'll play freshman year and they'll fall off. If you don't entirely like what you see, Czech Diallo is one going second round from Kansas, 33 overall, I believe. I think it was New Orleans that swooped him up via trade. But if he had just played overseas somewhere, or I don't know, did something else, he would have probably gone somewhere in the first round, you could say, because he really
Bill Self has become known for killing guys' draft stock. That's just what he's been doing lately.
Yeah, I mean, that's another angle to look at it with Bill Self. I mean, people were questioning Malachi Richardson coming out because of what happened with Tyler Ennis a few years ago. That was one thing. Just like he was a guy that had an amazing freshman year for the one and done at Cuse, and then Tyler Ennis is now bouncing back and forth from the D-League. But, yeah, some of the guys who were high prospects last year, they were going a lot later than you expected, and vice versa. A lot of these international guys we're seeing getting picked so early in the draft, guys we've not heard of. So that was the biggest angle of this draft for me. I'm interested to see the trades at this point. Look, you can dissect the draft so much, but I haven't watched most of these guys play. How many of these guys have you seen play? Or not speaking like you specifically, just like you as in like anybody that's listening or watching or even trying to dissect basketball, unless you're like working for one of these sites where it's your job to break down the draft, like
Right.
to analyze it for up to the year in advance, like Draft Express or some of the other like draft analysts you have out there. How do you know how a prospect from Europe, unless you're watching these Adriatic League basketball games, how do you know how good they are, how their game is going to translate to the NBA? What, watching a 5-minute mixtape? You don't know that. Sure, Dragan Bender is a guy that it just seems naturally that he's got that ability. People, I guess, they watched Porzingis, and there was doubts about him. And look what he did right away coming into the NBA. And look what he's going to be doing for the Knicks for years to come. There's only so much you can do just watching it. Now I'm interested to see where the chips fall via trade. Demarcus Cousins, we touched on him and his Instagram. Okay, is it time to pull the plug on him in Sacramento? You have Boston, who had literally at this point has so many draft assets that they're drafting guys from overseas because they don't have roster spots for them. They took 2 first-rounders that they just had their Euro stashes for them. They're not going to play right away, literally because – partially at least because they don't have roster space for them because Danny Ainge has used so many draft picks recently. And they still have so many more. I looked at the deals today, just like going through some of the smaller deals I didn't get a chance to see. Boston acquired the Clippers 2019 first-round pick in a draft day deal. So they have so many assets. It's unbelievable. Now's the time to trade them. They didn't do it in that deal, potential deal for Jimmy Butler, and they took Jaylen Brown, people questioning that. So, time to make some trades. Draft picks more valuable than ever. That's the bottom line. And I want to see these trades with free agency coming up and say you don't want to shell out $20 million for Harrison Barnes. Why not give up some assets, make a trade for someone that's going to be making a whole lot less because they signed their contract before the cap boom of 2016. So that's my final draft takeaway. I cannot wait for free agency. So that's a really nice plug for the draft, and I'm sure the NBA appreciates that. But, yeah, I think that free agency is where all hell is going to break loose, and I'm so excited.
Yeah, just quickly, I don't want to take up too much time, but quickly I just want to say I like what the Suns did. I think Bender and Marcus Chris are both 2 versatile guys they can put in the front court. And they got Ulis in the second round, who's a good backup point guard.
Forgot about him.
So they can trade. They need to trade Knight or Bledsoe. They got to pick one and just trade them.
There were rumors to do it too. Yeah, Woj reported that they're looking to trade one of them. I thought that for whatever reason thought like when the Kings deal was initially reported, I thought that it was going to say that
one of them. Yeah,
one of them, and then there's other assets involved. But give it time. I think.
Yeah, they need.
That
they need to build around.
Yeah, that makes sense. You have Booker in the backcourt there, so you only need one of those guys at this point. You don't need to play that kind of 2-point guard lineup they were thinking about doing back with Hornacek. Now you have a legitimate player in Devin Booker, someone that you could build up with. Now you have 2 bigs hopefully at least one of them pans out to be something that you can work with down the line. Still have Tyson Chandler there, and he's older, but, still a defensive asset, still provides mentorship. And we'll see if those Phoenix Suns doctors can work their magic again. Maybe Tyson Chandler due for a bounce-back year. Everyone's writing him off after 1 year. You never know. But go ahead.
Yeah, last draft thing. I just think we should touch on Boston a little bit more just because I think that was the big story coming in after 1 and 2. And Danny Ainge could have given up picks. He could have got Butler. He could have got other guys. Do you like what he did in terms of, sticking to his guns and not undervaluing Jimmy Butler, not giving up too much for Jimmy Butler, not forcing it, as he has so many assets going forward? Because I think a lot of Celtics fans were really kind of upset that they didn't make something out of this draft. But I think when you're Danny Ainge, if the trade's not there, you can't make it. You don't want to make a bad trade. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get you. But at some point, with all those assets, do something. Because I think what this trade does, and I think we kind of went back and forth for a minute or two on Twitter about this. Okay, his drafting ability, I think is starting to come into question. We see what he can do in deals. He's made so many excellent deals over so many years, but the past 3 years, he's had a questionable first-round pick. You have, from 2 years ago now, James Young, last year Rozier, and now this year, Jaylen Brown. Yes, he's good. He has the skills, turn into one of those players, and not to use all the cliches in the book, but high character kid. Because you just read something he said, which I thought was pretty funny. He went to Cal, which is obviously one of the elite schools in the country. And he mentioned one thing he liked about coming to Boston is that Harvard and MIT are there, which it's pretty funny that, just because you think of a basketball player like a jock kind of thing, even if they're smart, you don't think okay, they're thinking about Harvard and MIT when they're coming to Boston. But I thought that was pretty funny. But everyone wanted Chris Dunn, even though that didn't make logistical sense. So we'll see where this goes with Danny Ainge. But I think at some point, making a deal, if you really want to turn this team into something that, other than an overachieving team based on what Brad Stevens can do with his coaching ability, and Isaiah Thomas getting control of the reins like he didn't have in Sacramento and Phoenix, if you want to turn your team into something other than that, you need to make moves. And, yeah, there isn't a rush, but if this keeps up, if Danny Ainge keeps this shtick up, I think sooner or later his fans aren't going to be too pleased. I think kind of the aura of, okay, this guy robbed Billy King silly, and is going to turn Billy King into one of the worst GMs ever. And I think if you start writing that history book, Billy King is right there based on that deal and also his other bad contracts he's handed out over the years. But, the aura of that deal isn't going to last forever. And you have to start doing something with it other than just drafting guys and Euro stashes and stuff. You need to build a contender. So it's not a rush for Danny Ainge. But within the next year or two, you got to start working towards that. Or I think the fans are going to get a little antsy here.
Yeah, I agree. And I just think maybe the best thing that happened to Boston draft night was the Nets trading Thad Young, because maybe they get a little bit better pick next year. But do you think there's anything else we need to touch on? I think we pretty much ran the gamut on the draft.
Look, we talk about basketball for hour 10 plus maybe. I don't have the clock up for how long we've been on, but we've been on an absurd amount of time. One last point I'll make. I don't think Thad Young being there or not being there is going to affect the Nets draft pick all that much, because I think they'll, as much as I love watching, as much as I love Thad Young, and I do, really, he's just getting a year and a half to watch him on my team. He's turned into one of my favorite players in the league. Definitely in my top 10 for just probably more than that. I'd say top 5 now just because he's been on my team. For guys I just love to watch them play. He's not going to affect how bad the Nets are next year, because they're a developing team that doesn't have much with that Thad Young. They're not going to be very good, flat out. Boston, the robbery continues for the next few years. 2 more draft swaps. Then you still have another first rounder in there in 2018, just flat out the Nets pick and your own pick. They have a million other assets too. They'll be fine. Just start doing something. That's my final take on this all. But any last words before we depart? Because it's 6 hours ahead and I'm going to get dinner soon.
All right. Last word, I'm excited about the Lakers' future. I like Ingram. I think he's a really good player.
On your team. Yeah,
I think he's the most exciting. I think he's the most exciting guy that they've drafted since Kobe. I think he's really versatile. Really, really good kid. from all accounts, and I think Luke Walton is going to have a fun time with the guys they have there. They're a couple of years away, but really trending in the right direction.
Yeah, one question for you. I just want to put out there. D'Angelo Russell, with everybody, with trade rumors about everybody.
I love D'Angelo Russell.
You think they're going to trade him? I don't think
No.
it makes sense, but because I did see that floating through some circles. I think this
Sacramento was trying to get him.
Nonsense will work itself out. The Swaggy P thing it's nonsense. D'Angelo Russell is just fine. I think Byron Scott was a horrendous head coach. He really was so bad. And just as a Nets fan, I'll just put this one last thing about Byron Scott. I think Jason Kidd and company bringing him to back-to-back NBA Finals, that he had a career in coaching. He added so many years onto his career because you look at a resume, you have 2 finals appearances. That does a lot for you. And, of course, the success in New Orleans as well with Chris Paul. When he's coached great players, yeah, they've gone far. But when he's been on teams that haven't been in that situation, a la Cleveland a few years ago, they had a very young Kyrie Irving. He didn't do anything with that team. Made matters so much worse in LA with an aging Kobe and trying to develop a roster. He literally couldn't get himself to do it. He's not getting a coaching job anywhere else ever. He's done. He dresses nicely on the sidelines. I'll give him that. Very well-dressed player. He was a key player on those Showtime Lakers teams, but not a good head coach.
Yeah, and I think when we're starting to talk about Byron Scott, it's probably time to wrap it up.
That's about time. We talk about Byron Scott and his dressing. That will do it for the KNC Basketball Podcast. We've been on for over an hour, well over an hour now. It's been a fun one, Connor. We will figure this out, and we're going to try to get back on here, a new one for you July 1st. So thank you for following along, listening to what we have to say about basketball. So take care, guys.